Welcome back to Up Front. Wisconsin is believed to be a serious contender for a huge new electronics plant that could employ thousands. Several states are competing for Foxconn, a Taiwanese company that makes iPhones and other popular electronics, and now wants to open a plant or plants in the U.S. President Trump alluded to this in his visit to Wisconsin last month. He spoke of negotiations with an unspecified manufacturer and said Governor Walker might get a, quote, very happy surprise soon. We're talking more about this now with Tom Still, president of the Wisconsin Technology Council. Tom, it's good to have you back on the program. And why is Foxconn such a big deal?
Well, it's a global company of giant proportions, obviously. They're known for assembling iPhones, but they also recently acquired Sharp, a television manufacturer. And I think in this case, Foxconn might be looking at the United States in terms of a display plant, displays for TVs, displays for other electronics. And so it's a big deal from so many aspects, including what it would do to really sharpen all of the emphasis on technology in Wisconsin.
How does Wisconsin stack up against some of these other states? Michigan is prominently mentioned as a competitor in this. In terms of education, for instance, do we fit well with what Foxconn wants to do?
We really do. I think we have the kind of what I would call new-collar workers who would fit well into this kind of plant. They may be folks who don't necessarily have a four-year degree, but they nonetheless have skills, certifications, other things that could make them a good fit for this kind of a plant. And as you know, some traditional manufacturing jobs have gone away, a lot of those folks are out there in the workforce, perhaps underemployed, and could fit into this situation.
How about our proximity to Chicago? How big a role could that play in this decision?
I think it's really big in terms of logistics, because Foxconn is going to want to, whatever it makes, whatever it chooses to make in this facility, if it comes to be, it's got to be shipped somewhere. And Chicago is a natural place for that, a jumping off place for that, as well as transportation facilities in the Milwaukee area and other places around the state that could get them to where they need to be on either coast. I think this is a case where they're looking at the U.S. market itself. And so when you take that perspective on it, where we're at is a good spot.
And I should point out that most of the potential sites seem to be things that are in Kenosha County or Racine County in that southeastern corner of the state.
Right.
I want to ask about politics because, after all, this is a state that Donald Trump won, helped him become president. It's a state where House Speaker Paul Ryan represents the area that we're talking about. How much does politics enter into this?
Well, it doesn't hurt, for starters. And if you look at the other maybe 5 or 6 states, depending on who's counting, states that are in contention, they're also states that the president carried. The politics at large are such that because of some of the discussion about tariffs, about what's going on in terms of companies doing more in the United States, I think that there are a lot of companies looking in general at these kinds of things. Samsung made a recent announcement. A variety of other companies are
They want to get on the president's good side.
They want to, and they also read the marketing handwriting on the wall that the president was elected because of some trends that are reflected in the deeper population. So that's a part of why all of these companies, whether it's Foxconn or others, may take a look at the United States in general. And in particular, Wisconsin, I think, has a lot of assets that really set us up.
What might hurt us in this? Because this really becomes, in some respects, I don't want to say a bidding war, but you have states competing against each other. Are we prepared to offer the incentives that some other states might offer to Foxconn?
I'm not privy to what those incentives might be, but Wisconsin, just on our size, we may not be as well positioned to win a straight-out bidding war with states such as Michigan, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Ohio, some of which have been mentioned in this regard, just because they're bigger. They have more dollars to throw at it. At the same time, we have other advantages that are more tangible in a non-fiscal way that could help make it happen. And that's true for whether it's Foxconn or the next big company that comes down the pike.
Do you learn, regardless of what happens, and I think most people would be obviously quite pleased if the state did get the Foxconn factory, but what do you learn from experiences like this? Because each one is sort of different, but yet somehow related in terms of how you try to recruit businesses like this.
Right. I think you learn what kind of infrastructure you have, what kind of assets you really have, both in a human capital sense and in a physical capital sense. You learn what resonates within the market and what doesn't. And so I think that's the process Wisconsin's going through right now. This is a really big deal if it does happen. But if it doesn't happen, there are reasons to think that the next thing that comes down could land here. Or even if it does happen, the next thing that comes down the pike could land here as well. So I think you learn a lot about what your state's true assets are and the partnerships that are important, not only at the state government level, the local government level, with industry, with education. When that all comes together, it can be a pretty powerful package.
Tom Still is the president of the Wisconsin Technology Council. It's always good to have you on the program, Tom.
Thank you, Mike.
We
Great to be
appreciate
here.
it. Yeah. Coming up next on Up Front, the teacher and local school board member who hopes to unseat one of the most powerful men in the country.